Look, I mean, I think kind of one of the things that I keyed on is like whatever happens in a business, and a business can succeed for external or internal reasons. It can succeed or fail because of how well you execute, or it can succeed or fail for externalities. I kind of wanted to control my own outcomes. And so the idea was founder seemed like the best way to do that. Also, I like wanted to be like an adventurer or a pirate, and then I realized that like you can't do that anymore. And this seemed like the next closest thing.
So what was your first entrepreneurial experience?
So my first, I ran sports camps and stuff as a kid. My first kind of like real business was out of university. I started a wind energy company. And so it's kind of like a solar city for wind, for those that are aware of that model. But basically, in university, you realized that the economics of small wind turbines and private wind turbines were actually quite good. And the vision was to sell hundreds of them in Saskatchewan. And so I cut my teeth like putting out milk and cookies in Saskatchewan and asking farmers to buy wind turbines, and they almost all said no. A few said yes. We got into industrial scale wind farm development. There was a program that allowed us we kind of like hacked a program that allowed us to build industrial scale wind farms. And so we ended up winning 2 contracts to build a $50 million wind farm in Saskatchewan, and ended up selling that business 18 months later or something like that.
And who did you sell to?
A company called Algonquin Power.
And they were public, or
They're public. They're like a mid-cap public energy company.
So what were your learnings? That's a pretty quick first company, pretty good outcome, I think. What were your learnings from that 18 months?
So I'll give you a bit of like the details. So when we were selling these turbines, we found this green option partner program. And to get into the weeds a little bit, there was 2 programs, and one of them was like a 10 megawatt, which is about 25 million bucks, and the other one was a 75 megawatt, which is like 250 million. And when we called the government and said, like, who's doing your 10 megawatt submissions, they said, like, nobody. Like, nobody's picking up the phone. And you needed 3 things to put an application in. You needed a $25,000 certified check, which means each application had to have a check. You needed a single line engineering diagram, and you needed land from a farmer. And so what we did was we turned these like town halls that we used to host to sell wind turbines, and we would say, let us lease your land for 14 days. And we'd pay them like $50. And then if they won, they would get a 2% royalty on this wind energy turbine. So that was like how we got the land. And then to get the engineering done, because we weren't engineers, we called up a bunch of wind turbine manufacturers and we said, hey, we think we can win these contracts. They're big contracts. For us, they were big contracts. We don't know how to do engineering. We will use your turbines if you do the engineering for us. And so we pre-sold the right to use the turbines, and then they paid for all the engineering. And then the third thing we needed was a $25,000 check. And so we borrowed $400,000 from a private investor for 3 weeks so that we could put and then the ones that would won, we would cash the check, and the ones that didn't, we'd be like, here's your money back. And so we kind of hacked it, and we put in 2/3 of the applications that year, and ended up winning 2 of these contracts. So I would say 2 things I would take away. If the big businesses were paying attention, they should have smoked us. If they had like an intern and an associate, there's no reason, because 12 months later, they were all trying to buy us in at a pretty big premium. So they just like weren't paying attention. These businesses look very impenetrable from far away. They're not. They are, the closer you get to these problem sets, they are like deeply flawed and very mediocre. So that was kind of the first thing. And the second thing is like, which a lot of folks have had parallels in their own journeys, is like, we just started. We had no idea this was going to be the outcome. But the action and the catalytic action of just like doing this put us in a position to then find and discover this opportunity, call it a pivot, whatever. But, you just got to start.
And then, so those are interesting lessons. Next thing is what was post-acquisition life like?
I traveled for a while. And so where we're going with this is KOHO, and so I'll kind of connect the dots of of what KOHO is and how we started it. So after selling that business, came into a bit of capital, had never had money, grew up to a single mom who worked very hard. She drove buses and cleaned houses, and it was very obvious that she worked hard to give us the life that we had. And so as I came into money, I started asking, like, what do people do with it? And it turns out that these are like really important decisions. And if you are in a good set of financial products versus a shit one, you will retire with like 30 to 50% more wealth. That is a fact. it's also a fact that the majority of Canadians are in shit ones. And so the way that I think about this today is whatever a life of agency is to somebody, it is very difficult to have agency if you do not have financial stability. And so you can do the math and be like, okay, these suboptimal financial products means that like a lot of people don't have the agency that they should. And like, that's kind of a bummer. And then I looked at my mom's investment portfolio and she had worked very, very hard. And sure enough, she was one of these people. And then I asked my brother for his last 3 months bank statements. My brother had paid $85 in bank fees in 3 months and he didn't know it. And like but those are not like anomalies in Canada. Those are very consistent. And so that kind of put me on the path to starting KOHO.
So you want to take on probably the strongest, biggest oligopoly in Canada. So when you had this idea, what did you have to believe and what did you have to convince people to let you even start this business?
Yeah, I think this is something that like people really misprice. In a lot of counterintuitive ways, it's easier to solve hard problems than it is to solve sort of, let's call them more pedestrian problems. And so when you are solving a hard problem, by definition, a lot of people will not be competitive with that. And so a lot of people just are not interested and will not do it, right? So that's kind of one thing. The second thing is like, if you think about a 2x2 of the best people in the world, they are paid well. So you're like, are you paid well or not? And do you care about the work or not, right? And the best people are gonna be in the top right quadrant where they're paid well to do work that they care about. And so like, there was a lot of both venture capitalists and folks who are willing to be like, yeah, we'll probably fall flat on our face, but it's worth a shot. And that actually aligns a lot of people and it creates a lot of like common vocabulary in the company and a lot of common trust in the company. And then the third thing is like, which actually maps very well to venture capital, which is like largely power law driven. You actually want really big asymmetric outcomes. And so like, we'll probably fail, or it increasingly seems less like that's the case. But at the time, and if we were gonna win, then it would probably be a good outcome for a fund, you know? So that was kind of the early insight, I guess.
So you get the backers,
Yeah.
you start, you get into business. How do you decide what your first product would be and how do you get it out there? Because like one thing you'll hear everyone complain about in Canada is the lack of open banking, the lack of access to infrastructure. So it feels like a slanted field. So how did you figure out what that wedge was and how did you get that into market?
Yeah, so even before we had a product, what we did, and you can still find this on my LinkedIn somewhere, there's a blog post called How We Used 1K to Raise 1 Million. And the first thing that we wanted to know is like, do people give a shit and do they care? And you will ask your friends and be like, is this a good problem? They'll be like, yeah, it's a good problem. You don't really like learn anything. And so what we did was we like built a real website and a fake funnel and had people like, would they sign up for this product? And that's like a pretty good litmus test that then you can show investors. But we took it a little bit further than that. And people were like giving us their name and their address and all that kind of stuff. And the way that we watched that through was we said, how much is it costing us to acquire a net new user, somebody who's never heard of us? And so then we had like, because the biggest variable in a business like this is like, and for almost any consumer business is like, how much is it going to cost you to get a customer, right? The economics are like generally easier to figure out. And so we built this funnel and then we went to investors and we said, we are getting users for $7. We spent $1,200 on ads. And I think so that created a wait list, and then I called everybody on that wait list, and most of them didn't pick up the phone. But like, and I would talk to a lot of them and be like, "What problems do you have with your bank?" And and a lot of the same things fall out. It's complicated. I don't get the fee structure. Like, I don't have. One of the crazy things about banking in Canada is like, and we somehow normalize this, is if you have less than $5,000, you like don't get a good savings rate at your bank. But like 2/3 of this country doesn't have $5,000, and then if you protect an oligopoly that prices out 2/3 of the country, that's a poor tax, right? So like you'd call people and they'd be like, I don't have $5,000. So I'm making a savings account with like 0.1%, And so that was kind of like the mechanics of it, but there was a bit of an arbitrage which we did, which when we looked at the space, most folks in Canada use a debit card who are living paycheck to paycheck. Without getting into the mechanics, like there's no cash back on debit cards because there's something called interchange. And so there's nothing that supports giving people cash back, and so banks pay a lot of money to acquire users, and then they charge fees to make that back. What we did was we took a prepaid card, which actually does make like 1.4%. So when you spend $100 at Home Depot with your Interact card, about 20 cents is generated. When you spend $100 at Home Depot with your KOHO or credit card, like $1.40 is generated. So what we were able to do is we took that prepaid card and then we gave somebody a no-fee account, but we were also able to give them cash back on a debit card for the first time in Canada. And so that kind of created like a no-fee account that you could use anywhere. They gave you real-time cash back. That was kind of the early. I know it's a long-winded answer, but that's...
No, I love that answer. And so you launch that product, it gets traction.
Not really.
No?
So when we launched, we were supposed to be like a tech-forward bank. We didn't even have like a chip on the card, and we thought we had this like really minimalist, slick white card, and everybody kept thinking it was a hotel key, like it was like that janky. We had a wait list, but what we did have within that is like we would have these. We probably had a few thousand users when we raised our Series A in 2017, but there were users who loved it. You know what I mean? There's like people, when they quantitatively spoke about it, they were very emotive. And more importantly, we had like cohort charts, which would say like, Alex spent $200 this month, and then he spent $250 the next month, and then he spent $300 the next, you know? And so you had this story of like, there are people who care. It's not very many people, but like people care.
Can I ask a question about that? Because one thing, if you look at fintech, like, you know, I think Nabi had like Revolut, Monzo up there, and at one point, all the questions about all these new neobanks is, can you beat a primary bank account?
Yeah.
So what these users, was this like their primary?
No.
Card? No, so no.
No,
so,
when we
so they
started.
cared, but
Yeah.
they weren't. It wasn't their primary account.
Yeah, not when they started. It's a pretty different story today. But this was always the wedge. And so kind of what fintech was like, for those who remember fintech 5-6 years ago, it was like a bunch of different verticals, and there'd be like one product for every single part of your life. And like, we didn't believe that thesis. We thought that like simplicity mattered and convenience mattered. And so like we talked about it, like, we're gonna go for the throat. We're gonna try and win the core account. The economics of banking work if you win the core account and if you can bring people other financial products. Because otherwise you will just always, like, if I'm only selling somebody a loan, whoever sells the cheapest loan wins that deal. Right? And you just like, it's a race to the bottom when you have less money. And so we focused on like, how do we build the best account in the country, in the full set? And so you start with spending, and then you get into savings and loans and travel and all those other, which is where we are today.
Was that obvious when you were there with that first debit card? Did you know what the product roadmap had to be based on other people's experience, or did you have to figure this out?
I mean, we had ideas. We are very much a product-led company and believe deeply in product velocity. And so we've definitely like iterated our way through it. We set like guardrails. And so one of the things that we ask ourselves before we launch a product is, would we be proud to recommend this to somebody we cared about? And when you do that, I think that you like ship better experiences. And because the banks are 2 orders of magnitude bigger than us, if we do the same things, if we charge the same fees, if we communicate the same way, like, we will lose. We have to win on product value. And so we care a lot about product velocity, and we've killed a lot of things, we've tried a lot of things, and some of those things have worked and some haven't. And so we've now iterated our way to like a pretty full banking stack.
Two questions based on what you just said there. First, how do you set the culture so everyone buys into this? Because product velocity sounds nice, but how do you get the team aligned around this? Yeah.
It's really hard. Product velocity is a tough one for a bunch of reasons. But I think this is like where a mission is a very it's still an underrated thing. Like, it is definitely the commonality at KOHO, because it sets like very clear guardrails, and we all have to interpret them, and like we still have to make money, and there's like obvious sources of tension. But I think it actually does give you a really common vocabulary for like to go at least have the conversation about what's a good and bad product, right? And then when it comes to product velocity, the way that we run the team, like, you really kind of have to get into the mechanics, but the way that we run the team is like self-sustaining, sufficient pods. And what we fundamentally believe is like cooperation is like is super overrated. And you should actually strive to, cooperation is like better than a lack of trust, but you actually just eliminate the need for cooperation. And so if you can have like self-sustaining atomic units of a team, and that's how we run today with like 10 teams at KOHO, product teams, you can actually ship a lot of things very, very quickly. And then, but where product velocity gets hard, and this is like kind of in the weeds, is you ship a lot of things and like some things are obvious winners and it's really easy to underwrite. Some things are obvious losers and those are easy to kill, but most things are in the middle. And then you have this like mental overhead of, did this work? Is this not working because the MVP sucked, or because we didn't communicate well, or because people don't care? And so you like really need to run your org with a lot of discipline when you're going to be like high product velocity. And
then you talk about killing the losers.
Yeah.
So I assume there's some adoption of them, and you're trying to be a core financial institution. Yeah. How do you set expectations of customers so when their product they like gets sunsetted, you don't lose them as a customer?
Well, you do lose them you have to be willing to lose them as a customer, right? And fortunately, I think that we have built a pretty high level of trust with our users and engagement, and they're like most folks now have north of 3 products at KOHO, so they're here for a variety of reasons. But like in isolation, it is a very hard thing to kill a product. But if you take a macro view, it's really important that you kill products as a company, right? Like you cannot, if you don't kill products and you run a high velocity organization, like the inevitable place that you end up is bloat. So this is why but it's actually like hard, and people rely on it, or and so that's like there is a zero-sum component to this stuff that takes like real sort of fights.
It's interesting because I like the fact that you're willing to sunset products and take the risk you lose customers, but I guess it lets you get to bigger, better places. You started what year again?
We raised our first capital in 2015.
So we're now, let's call it a decade into it.
Yep.
And fintech at one point was the hottest vertical in tech. I think anyone had a beating heart could go raise money. Yeah. And then it became the coldest vertical. So how did you imagine there's some periods that were more challenging than others. How did you get through them and keep the team morale up and keep the momentum up?
It's interesting because first of all, you learn a lot whenever you're going through those things, and it was fascinating and painful for me as a founder to go from a world where fintech was trading at 67, our multiple discount from 2022, which was, we probably traded at a 90% discount. Now we were fortunate to grow into it, so we actually kept our valuation roughly the same. But it was an enormous learning experience for me, because I went from venture capitalists being as a heuristic, which is a crazy heuristic, to double your engineering team every year, which is an insane way to run a business in hindsight, but it was 2021 and money was free. And pivot on a dime and be how could you let your costs bloat to this amount? And so as an aside, not answering your question, is one of the things that I really learned is whatever happens with the business, whether it succeeds or fails, it's going to be on me. You know what I mean? I could follow an investor's plan perfectly, and if it fails, it's not they're going to stand up and take the hit. It's on me, and that's good. That's the game. I don't think you're a founder until you really understand that. The fascinating thing with the team was it really galvanized the team. In the sense that now we've kind of been through it, And I think when everything was up and to the right and it was groovy, it's you haven't really been battle tested. But, we did 2 riffs in a year. It was definitely people could have taken more money and left. And I've never had a co-founder, so it was the trust equation was different for me. But now that we've